Let's move over to the defensive side of the ball. So, fortunately for Iowa State will have in most games that they play, in a lot of games they play, they will have the best individual player on the field in Dominique Orange. In probably, I would say in most games that I don't know if I can think of anyone right off the top of my head. Maybe Arizona State with Sam Levitt, but like for the most part, Dominique Orange is going to be the best player in the stadium most games that Iowa State plays. And he commands a double team on his own. But unfortunately, outside of him, the pass rushers last year were not good. The pass rush was bad. In the game when J.R. Singleton and Dominique Orange were both hurt, Kansas went incredibly poorly for Iowa State because they had zero pass rush. And that is not going to work this year. The schedule's a little tougher. They're playing Arizona State and they're playing Arizona State in the regular season this time. They've got a few other trickier road games. They've got to go to TCU. They've got to go to Oklahoma State, which who knows what Oklahoma State's going to be. But, they've got a little bit tougher games this time around. You're not, you don't play Utah this year, but you don't get to have a spot on your schedule with a Utah team that everyone thought was going to be good. And turns out they were terrible. Iowa State has to find a pass rush this year. Now, this doesn't necessarily only have to come from the defensive end spot. We can talk about, this is kind of going to mold into partially a linebackers discussion as well, even though the linebackers is a situation like the running back where you're not necessarily worried about trying to find a starter and fill holes, but you're just trying to figure out how your rotation is going to work out because you have so much returning depth. But, Iowa State did bring in guys to try to address this. But time will tell on how well this goes. Iowa State really hasn't had a plus pass rush since Will McDonald left. Let's take a look here at our roster. So you've got some interesting names. Miles Mendozun has been in the program for a long time. Started out as a linebacker, is now a defensive end. He's played a bunch last year. You'd like to see him take a step forward. The thing with Miles Mendozun, though, is he's a redshirt senior. He's been here forever. Played all 14 games last year, finished with 14 tackles, and just a half of a tackle for loss. He's a great special teams player. Awesome. Love that he's a great special teams player. You need those. However, that's not good enough. I need Miles Mendozun to take a step forward and not just be a special teams all-star. I need him to be a pass rusher. Vontroy Malone is one of the transfers they brought in. He's coming from Tulsa, 6'4", 265, good size on the defensive end. We did see a video with him in it. I think Cycling Football put it out last week, where it's just interviewing some guys, on campus, doing the man on the street type of interviews. They were talking to him a little bit, but he's a fairly physically imposing guy. I think Jamison Patterson, was interviewing some people wherever, and Vontroy Malone looked big compared to JMO, who is a good size safety. Vontroy Malone is all of that 6'4" measurement. He's a fairly physically imposing guy. Now we will see how productive he can be. He had 25 tackles last year, 5 tackles for loss, and 2 sacks, which unfortunately would make him more productive last year than any of Iowa State's other pass rushers outside of Dominique Orange and J.R. Singleton. Absolutely 100% a candidate to be the starter. One of the starting defensive ends. We'll see it from there. Another transfer they brought in, Tamatoa McDonough from Yale. Ivy League only plays 10 games last year, but in 10 games had 27 tackles and 6.5 sacks, and recorded a sack in 5 straight games. Specifically had 2.5 against Princeton. You like that? It's Ivy League, but we actually did just pull an offensive lineman from the Ivy League, and he was very good. So just because he's from the Ivy League doesn't mean he can't be good. But he was productive at Yale. Maybe I don't know if he's like a dominant pass rushing force, but he was absolutely productive at Yale. Absolutely in the conversation to be in that that top end of the defensive end pass rushing role, along with Vontroy Malone and a couple other guys we'll see down here as well. Next guy on the list here is Trey Verdon. He's Malik's little brother, true freshman, 6'1", 250. I remember walking past Trey Verdon, and I'm 6'1", and Trey looked a little bit shorter than me. The 6'1" might be a touch generous, but I'm not trying to hate on Trey Verdon. But um, he doesn't have like exceptional size for defensive end, but that doesn't mean he can't be good. Will McDonald was tall, but not very big. 250. If Trey Verdon is 250, then he weighs 15 pounds more than Will McDonald ever weighed in college. And sometimes being short can help you get better leverage and all that too. So being short isn't necessarily a big deal on the defensive end side if you've got a good motor and all that. I would be kind of surprised if he showed up a lot, more than his redshirt games. But you never know. Like I said, the defensive end spot is wide open as far as I'm concerned. If you're going into camp right now with guys, they're like, oh, these are the clubhouse leaders at defensive end. I don't think that's the right approach here because they need to find guys. The only two spots you've got locked down on your entire defensive line is you've got Dominique Orange at nose tackle and you've got Zamir Hawk either behind him or next to him as a defensive tackle. Like that's all. That's the only thing you've got solidified on your defensive line right now. Charlie Wolleben, I don't know too much about him. He's a true freshman. He's got good size, 6'4", 245, but I don't know if he'll be ready to go. Jack Limbaugh, same kind of true freshman. Needs to put on some weight there, 6'3", 230. Kamari Moore, another true freshman. You get the size, 6'1", 320. That's good size to play defensive tackle right away. Not sure if he'll be ready to go or not, but especially because you've already got Dom Orange and Zamir Hawk there. Jace Gilbert, the other Jace Gilbert from Wisconsin, whichever one you want to call the other Jace Gilbert, but the defensive line Jace Gilbert, redshirt freshman, obviously redshirted last year. Good size at 6'5", 280. This could be his chance to break out. He only played in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. This absolutely can be his chance to break out. I think he's probably more of a defensive tackle. But obviously typically has moved guys around. Annie Wazirike was the same size, and they were not afraid to move Annie around between tackle and end spots in college. So, certainly in the running there. Elijah Carnell, I don't know a ton about him. Comes from a really good high school program in Bishop Gorman. That's a big high school program, nationally relevant high school program. We'll see. Good size. Kenny Eziogu is one of the guys that I would have earmarked along with Miles Mendozun is like, this is a guy that has the potential. He needs to take a step forward. He needs to step up and be the guy we kind of thought he could be. You really need Ike to take a step forward and establish himself in this rotation. He's got the size, 6'5", 285. He's a pretty physically imposing guy. You just need him. You really need him to have his breakout year this year, or at least push other people to have a breakout year this year. Braden Simonson, redshirt junior. He hasn't played a ton up to this point, I don't believe. Maybe some. Yeah, he's just been a practice squad guy, so I don't know if he's really a factor in this. You got Dom Orange there, Chad Andrews, BJ Carter is another defensive line spot, another defensive tackle type prospect at 6'3", 310, great size. Cannon Butler is the last defensive end on this list. They brought him in. He's a transfer from UNI, played at Waterloo Columbus. He was fine at UNI. He did put together 59 tackles in 12 games, which that's partially a product of UNI's system that, their defensive ends are going to rack up more tackles. Even if he started and played 100% of games at Iowa State, Iowa State's system isn't going to allow for that kind of tackle number, but 59 tackles, 8 for a loss and 1.5 sacks. He was fine. That certainly doesn't mean he can't step up and be a good pass rusher for Iowa State. And maybe refining his role to being a pass rusher can help him boost that sacks number up a little bit. He's got the size to compete at 6'6", 265, pretty good sized dude. But is he the magic bullet here at defensive end? I don't know. We'll see. I don't know if any of these guys necessarily are. Cannon Butler, Miles Mendozuna, Kenny Yogu, Tomatone McDonough. Any of these guys, and frankly, my guess is that all of these guys will figure into the rotation earlier in the season. Vontroy Malone as well. But they more than anything, they need at least one or two guys to step up and just step up and really establish themselves as like, okay, you can rely on these guys to put pressure on the quarterback. Because right now, last season you just did not see it. The other part of this too, though, the pass rush absolutely will be supplemented with the linebacker group, who is bringing back 1 million players that have started games, including, most specifically, Caleb Bacon. Now, the thought was before last season that Caleb Bacon was going to be the starter at middle linebacker. Ends up breaking his leg on like the second special teams play of the game, gone all season. Now that you've got so many returning players back, you've got, Caleb Rosina will be healthy again. You've got Carson Willich, you've got Cooper Ebel healthy, you've got John Klosterman, you've got Will McLaughlin and Bo Goodwin, and you've got and Ryland Barnes. You've got tons of guys that played and started games last year and have started previously in their careers. You don't need Caleb Bacon to be your middle linebacker anymore. You can let Caleb Bacon be a supercharged version of his 2023 self, who was essentially a guy that just pinned his ears back and rushed the passer. In that role, he was awesome. He was amazing as an edge rusher in 2023. I would love to see him be that guy. I want him to be Von Miller. I want him to be, primarily a pass rusher that can drop into coverage when you need him to. He needs to be the game wrecker for Iowa State on defense. Caleb Bacon, Will McLaughlin has the ability to do something like that too, but they need to supplement the pass rush with those types of guys off the edge, knowing that you have experience. And Bo Goodwin did some of that a little bit last year towards the end of the season, especially. You need those guys to be involved in the pass rush, especially because you just have there's so many unknowns at the defensive end spots, and because you feel pretty good about what's behind them as far as experience in the kind of the core group of the interior linebackers. Your Sam, your Will, and your middle linebacker, that you can use Caleb Bacon as a stand-up edge rusher. However that has to come together. Maybe you can find a really high-end defensive end there to rush the passer. Maybe it has to come from linebackers. Either way, Iowa State's pass rush must be better this year. And if the linebackers aren't completely decimated by injuries yet again, that seems like it should happen. But we will see.